Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of DE&I Unstructured and Unscripted. I'm John Jacobs, co-founder of Candidate X. I'm joined with my fellow co-founders, Sunil and Man. Hey, guys.
Hi.
Morning. Got to get my teeth in this morning.
Do you know what? I'm dying to know what the AI is going to pick up for the transcript in Sunil's name this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Senior the owl, or the senior owl. I think
senior owl was last week, wasn't it?
Well, I thought AI is the answer to our prayers when it comes to DEI.
No, what it means is 2 hours of my time on a Friday editing the transcription, but that's my woes, not for anyone else. So let's talk. Let's get into it. This week, what we've been talking about, or what's been topical, particularly this week, is the phrase which you love or hate, which is cancel culture, and its kind of rise in prominence, and it's never too far from the headlines in recent times, thanks to our beloved social media and its influence on boycotting things and getting messages sent around when people are offended by things that are sometimes absolutely rightfully to be offended by and sometimes not. So I wanted to talk about it this week. It was in the news because Netflix, the CEO for Netflix, Ted Sarandos, had defended some comments that were made upon the Dave Chappelle special that they hosted and put on the network, in which he made some comments around which were transphobic, homophobic comments. And Ted Sarandos has come out to say initially that you can't stifle artistic creativity and, you know, freedom of speech, etc., and that caused a bit of a walkout of staff and a recurrence of the debate. So what is discuss today how we feel about cancel culture and what it's doing to, you know, our sense of humor, you know, as diversity and inclusion advocates and people that are actively looking to consider all viewpoints from all people. Can we still have a sense of humor about the way we go about our lives? Because it seems there's a lot of people out there that are ready to say you can't joke about a lot of things these days.
We go, mate.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, man, I know you've done a lot of reading into the Pacific Netflix cases at this moment in time, Dave Chappelle. So it'd be good, probably, if you wanted to kind of get your views on that. I mean, I've got more of an overall view about what my engagements and what I'm seeing.
Go for it, Senor. Just say what's on your mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, it all, and then it goes by case basis. You can't kind of just have a sweeping brush over this. So there are elements that, I mean, look at my own personal experiences. I met some old friends the other day, and you know, they were, as soon as I walked in, and obviously I'm doing Candidate X, all of a sudden it was like, well, we can't say this, we can't say that in front of you, and I'm like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, you know, you're
woke.
Yeah, you're diversity, inclusion. I go, yeah, but
yeah.
You don't understand, you know, because someone's doing something to make things better and driving equality, etc., doesn't mean I've lost my sense of humor. You know, I've always had experiences where I've played a lot of sport, and in that environment and within our team, we made jokes when I was younger about each other, about ways, you know, we're either from Caribbean or from India or from England, and it was a joke amongst us, but that was acceptable amongst us, right? And we knew we could make those jokes amongst our group. Now what I'm seeing is happening is that someone will see that or overhear that and go, well, you're this, you're that, you can't be doing this, and it's like, well, hold on, there's a lack of understanding here about the context of what's being said. I was in training, and my wife was around, and she's from mostly Punjabi background, and have a couple of friends around, and I've known these guys for years. And I put music on, and some Bhangra music came on. So I said to my wife, "Oh, Bhangra music on," and straight away I was attacked because I was like, "Oh, you're being discriminatory because you're putting that music on and saying she likes that." I go, "Well, A, she's Punjabi, and B, she likes the music." So now these are people I know, and they're now picking up because I'm in diversity inclusion that I can't be saying certain things. It's ludicrous in my eyes into some scenarios, but some things where it goes across a certain line, then yeah, I agree that power of a community is proving itself and showing itself in these circumstances.
You know, we ran a poll this week on LinkedIn just to get a bit of a temperature check on what people think about the subject, and the question posed was the same: is cancel culture killing comedy, and are we all having a sense of humor bypass because of cancel culture? And 75% of people said that we have taken cancel culture too far. That we need to have more of a sense of humor to be able to laugh at our differences, which is really interesting. There's a lot of people that are kind of over the cancel culture element of things, and they think we should all kind of have a bit more perspective and take a bit more context on these things.
Sorry, man, but yeah, before you, I'm hogging it, but this is comedy, right? So I was having a discussion the other day, and it's like, okay, the Dave Chappelle is specific to what he said there, but you got other comedians like Russell Peters over in Canada. You watch Russell Peters; he takes the mickey of every single race, religion, including himself, out there, and he's sold out, and everyone laughs, etc. So, are we saying now that he can't be doing that anymore? Because to his audience and everyone, that's acceptable. You know, that's what they go to see, that's what they go to laugh about, etc. And it's almost like, I don't want to say banter because that'd be taken a different way nowadays, but he's having that sort of banter about everyone's differences. And actually, if you look at a crowd, it's a very diverse crowd, right?
And I don't know about you guys, but I grew up as a teenager watching South Park, which is pretty much the most offensive thing when you watch back. Now, some of that stuff, you literally, everybody, as you say, is in the firing line for that. As a kid, I found that funny. I haven't watched it for years, mind you. I don't know how well that's aged, and there is a debate as to stuff that's rightfully cancelled with a modern perspective on things that you can't say these days that were being said back then, and even further back. You only need to go back to 70s and 80s, and BBC sitcoms to find regularly offensive things that were said, which should rightfully be cancelled now. But I don't know, man. Go on. You have your thoughts on it.
I mean, I thought about this a lot, and I think when you put the word and precurse the word cancel with anything, when you're canceling somebody, it's grave. It's grave, right? So it should be reserved for very specific circumstances and situations. And I guess from the perspective of the Netflix employees that did the walkout, a consensus was the fear of hate economy that's breeding, that lives on social media, and that's completely understandable, right? Given what we've been going through with Trump administration, our own country is having Brexit. Whether you agree or disagree with things like Brexit or Trump, etc., what no one should be abiding by is the magnitude of the division that exists and the hatred that was bred off that, and that is stirred by just people using that as an excuse to attack one another in cohorts and things like that. And that for me is completely unacceptable. So cancel culture exists to address certain things like this, specifically with the Dave Chappelle situation here. His this is not his first Netflix special, and this is not his first Netflix special that he's referred defamatory comments to any group, specifically LGBT community. Their specific misgivings with him is that he's misgendered people. So he believes gender is a fact, right? Actually, I can't say that he believes that. He said it for sure, and he might have mentioned it as a skit or as a joke, as a punchline, etc. I don't know. Only he can answer that, and that's where problems. This is where this problem's arisen, and then it obviously manifests into other things. Now, people took umbrage to that, which I understand. I don't believe gender is a fact in the way that he's said it in that context. I believe in all the spectrums that sort of exist in this. So let me be clear about that. But there are lots of people who do agree with what he said. Now, should we just ignore that? We have a difference of opinion on a lot of things, lads. There's 3 of us in our company that talk about lots of things, and we're not always going to align and agree to everything. But it's important that we welcome differences of thoughts. That's what diversity is about. Okay, so if you're preaching hate, 100% get shut down. We can never have the extremisms that we've seen in history. That's not what we're saying should be acceptable. But he has a point of view that's not only his. I'm sure if you ran a poll about gender, whether it is a fact, I'm sure lots of people would subscribe to that positioning. But shouldn't we understand that people have different opinions? Shouldn't we understand that we've got this movement here on behalf of people that are trans and try and connect everything? The moment we cancel everything, whether people want to distill it down to banter or humor, etc. The moment we cancel everything, we're no longer building bridges. We're no longer trying to reach out and make connections and engage and understand. And that for me is the biggest problem, because as we all know, if you really, really get into the depths of what's going on here, what Netflix are demanding now, their employees are more diversity in their staff, etc. All good things, right? And I'm not diminishing those things, but no one has talked about education, right? No one's talking about, actually, Netflix has got loads of resources and money. How do we not just only reflect people in their shows and their teams, etc.? How do we invest in areas that we do need to invest in to bring education up about the awareness of trans and trans rights? Because the reason why he's now humbled, Ted Sarandos is his full name, isn't it?
Sarandos, yeah.
Yeah, Sarandos, sorry. It's because he's not acknowledged the humanity and the hurt that of the people that sort of exist in this business. And last thing on this, the irony that the only person that got sacked for this was a black trans individual is mental. And I know I'm not trying to dispute legally whether they should have done, because the data leak and all that sort of, or supposed data leak or alleged data leak, but what's happened of the basis of this is pretty it's pretty nuts. Right.
Talk about man education, and I think that kind of segues into history as well with cancel culture. We saw through the Black Lives Matter movement of recent times, like the toppling of the statue in Bristol, for example, of Edward Colston, and his prominent role in the slave trade in the UK, and this kind of feeling of, why have we put up with kind of having this person as a bit of a hero on a plinth when it caused so much wrong doing and ill in the world, and you absolutely see the perspective of people to go, this shouldn't be something that we laud, but at the same time, these types of things, this is an educational opportunity. You can't just ignore the fact it ever happened, and I guess by taking the statue down, you lose that opportunity to teach the kids about the wrongdoing of this person.
Yeah, and the wrongdoing of this person on an environment that they lived at the time,
in the context that they lived in at the time, right?
This is another conversation. It feeds into definitely the educational piece, because would you have such polarizing views if you were educated and knew about certain things better, right? So what I'm talking about is like, you used that example just now. If you understood about the British Empire, you understood more about the slave trade and what happened with the British Empire in other countries, and not having a delusion that it was fantastic and so powerful and everything was smelling of roses. Actually, we committed some awful things in other countries, and that's why we have a lot of migration now, etc. That, I think, if that it comes back down, it's key to underline. Man mentioned it, you just mentioned it. Education. We had a better education, we'll be better understanding, and maybe we'll have a different viewpoint, and we won't have, like, you might still have polarizing views no matter what, but you won't have it to the extent we're seeing now on an array of things.
It's such an interesting topic and conversation, right? And in the States at the moment, they've got a big debate, and it's huge in the news about critical race theory being taught at school and things like that. And whether you're against it or for it, etc., that conversation needs to be had in the right way to understand, right, if we are teaching these things at a certain level, how do we do this? Because I want my kids to understand colonialism. Why my mum and dad end up in this country? How did Hong Kong become colonized? What happened in '97? Why are we giving land back? What's all this about, etc. Right? And that's just one place that the empire touched, let alone all the things around the world. And it's super interesting, and you get some key learns on this stuff. But I don't want it to be done at the expense of other young children who are white, to make them feel guilty for something they had no idea about. And that's what can be very dangerous at the moment in time when we get into these sort of cancel culture conversations. And that's the fear. This thing just drives wedges, canceling people out because you don't like what they've got to say, you don't agree with it. You can walk away, you can turn it off. But to say they need to be taken away, etc., doesn't mean the conversation shouldn't be had, doesn't mean that these views aren't there. So why not address them?
I would say though, man, it depends on what they've said. Because if they have an influence over lots and lots of people, individual children, kids, younger generation, then that does feed through, and then that point of view is adopted, right? So I think it all depends on that the context of what's happened and what's said.
So on this, right? I've been watching Dave Chappelle for years, as you know, right? And I haven't watched the whole of this closer one. I started watching the beginning of it, and he touches upon a lot of different groups, etc. And he does talk a lot about the LGBTQ community. Does talk a lot about women, etc., and all this sort of stuff, right? And I'm not trying to defend his positioning or what, but the main point there, what you're trying to say is someone like him has influence. We acknowledge that, right? And with his influence, he should have levels of responsibility about these things, which is totally acceptable. Totally acceptable. But I'm someone who's been watching him for a long time, and I'm part of a group that's trying to confront these challenges, because I need to understand points of views from other things. So if we decide all I'm going to read is these things that subscribe to my way of thinking or the way I believe the world should exist, I'm completely being negligent and naive to everything else that does exist and not trying to entertain those thoughts. And I'm also one of those individuals, despite what I'm hearing and listening to, etc., I can still make my own decisions on these things. And whilst I may or may not be the mean or the medium, I don't know, right? I'm not saying that other people aren't going to look at him and be persuaded some way. He never said to anybody, go out there and do this or that and the other. He put a position about gender, misgendering, and I don't agree with him. I can accept that, but I'm also not naive to think he's the only one that believes that. We need to understand why people believe that, what the discussions can be to make them understand a little bit more about why we don't believe that's the case. Do you see what I'm saying?
And yeah, isn't the greatest power, particularly with comedians, is just to vote your feelings with whether you spend your time on watching them or buying tickets to their shows, in future, rather than having them fully cancelled so that they never appear on any sort of platform ever again, depending on what they've said and how offensive they've become. But just if you don't agree and you now don't like this person for whatever reason as a comedian, just don't watch them. Don't go to their shows.
Sorry, Esther, I know you want to jump in with something, but 2 points on this. Who's really won out of this whole situation? Netflix have, because it's in the news, it's prominent, it's controversial. This show is probably one of the most downloaded things now, or sorry, watch things now, stream things, because they want to see what the controversy is. There's ways to handle this situation, right? Why not? They could get, in fairness, Packles Minor, who's the lady that got sacked. Sorry, the gentleman that got sacked, and connect them with David, right, and have a conversation about this discussion. They could pause the show in the meanwhile and get there's various ways to address and look at this discussion, and it's unfolded the way it is. But I'm just hoping it would be a really interesting way for people to sort of understand, okay, this is the landscape. How do we actually deal with these sort of situations, rather than reach for the gun straight away, shoot and take it all out?
That's typical what we've seen in the last couple of years, though. How companies and how people are reacting because of the lack of understanding of the whole diversity and inclusion. How this all works is either right, you get one extreme to the other, right? That's how we work, and we've seen that from companies, doing things just like that impulsively because they believe that's the right thing to do, and they need to stamp down on it ASAP. This comes back to that understanding and of the deeper, rather than making these decisions and extreme decisions one way or the other. Actually, you mentioned it before. Understand more, put more resources into the research, more resources into engagement, communities, as a company, as an individual, so you get a lot more understanding, and you understand what's acceptable, what's hurtful, what impact you're having when you're having these discussions, or you're being a comedian. Because I was going to say, on a smaller scale here, we had our problems here in the UK with loads of comedians. Roy Chubby Jones. Remember him?
Richard Brown.
Yeah, remember him? I mean, he got cancelled from Brighton or whatever because of his racial views, and his is quite extreme. But he could quite easily stand up and say, "Well, hold on. If he gets away with it over there or whatnot, what about me? Is it because I'm a white male having jokes and making jokes about other races, etc." So you get into all these different areas.
Yeah, and you're talking about precedent, which is really key. I mean, not to hijack this, right? But as a kid growing up, Roy Chubby Brown made a lot of derogatory comments about, Orientals, right? He was no holds bar in the way he was talking about Chinese people, Japanese people, etc., and things like that. And as a kid growing up in a mining town up in the Midlands, mate, there was a lot of choice words used to express that, because it was already established as precedent you could do that, because mums and dads were watching this with their children, so then they would take that into school and say that to me and things like that. So I'm well aware of the danger of these things, and I'm not suggesting what's happening or the discussion about Dave Chappelle is without merit. I'm not saying that at all. Absolutely, it's with merit. But generally speaking, about cancel culture is my point. Like, how do we address this? What's our viewpoints on this? Because we want to push it away does not mean the points of view or beliefs don't exist. And I think that can be dangerous, to just believe yourself in this cocoon, to go, what I believe is the only thing that's true. Everything else is not relevant. Of course it's relevant. We need to be understanding as to what other people feel and engage, and that's how we can make change and transform this.
Thanks, guys. We're going to have to call a timeout on this one because we've massively overrun, but that's the nature of this conversation, and we could carry on and talk about this all day. So, but thank you for your views on it this week, and we'll see you again next week for another edition.
Take care.
Cheers. Thanks a lot, Jay.